There exists in the architecture of human decision-making a weight we cannot see but always feel. An anchor cast not into water but into memory, holding us captive to numbers that no longer exist, except in our minds. This is anchoring bias, the dangerous tendency to cling to the first piece of information we receive, thus transforming it into a mental anchor that prevents us from navigating freely. In markets, this anchor is almost always the price we paid, that original number that we mistake for eternal truth, confusing cost with value, history with destiny. We become prisoners not of present reality, but of past transactions, unable to release ourselves from numbers that have lost all meaning except the emotional weight we assign them. The market, that vast and indifferent ocean, does not remember what you paid, does not care about your entry price, rewards only those who can see value as it is now, not as it once was. This is the fable of the invisible anchor, a story carved into driftwood about a young fisherman who learned, too late, that the heaviest anchors are those we carry in our minds. Invisible chains that bind us to the past, while the present flows away like tide we cannot recapture. In the coastal village of Portus, where the sea beat against black rocks in eternal rhythm, and fishing boats painted in fading colors lined the harbor like prayers offered to fortune, there lived a young man named Ambrose, 25 years old, with the ambitious eyes of someone who believed the future was his to claim. Ambrose was known as the most promising of the young fishermen, the one the elders pointed to as the future of the village's prosperity. When his father died, leaving him a modest inheritance of 100 gold coins, Ambrose made what he believed was the wisest decision of his life. He purchased a fishing boat, a vessel of medium size with sturdy oak planks and canvas sails that caught wind like cupped hands catching hope. The boat was called the Fortuna, and the price, negotiated over 3 days of intense discussion, was exactly 100 gold coins. This transaction, this exchange of inheritance for asset, seemed to Ambrose like the foundation of his coming empire. But in that moment of purchase, something invisible happened, something he would not recognize until much later when it had already destroyed him. The number 100 became fixed in his mind, not as a historical fact, but as an eternal truth. 100 gold coins was not merely what he had paid. It was what the Fortuna was worth, intrinsically, permanently, regardless of any future circumstances. The fishing market in Portus was volatile by nature, subject to forces no individual could control. The great schools of fish migrated according to patterns both seasonal and mysterious, sometimes congregating near the southern waters where Portus sat, sometimes moving north to colder seas that required longer voyages and larger vessels. The weather changed, trade routes shifted, new fishing technologies emerged, and through all these transformations, the price of boats rose and fell like the very waves they sailed upon. But Ambrose had constructed in his mind a different reality, one where the Fortuna existed outside these market forces, protected by the sacred fact of what he had paid. When other fishermen discussed the falling prices of medium boats due to the northern migration of fish, Ambrose dismissed these conversations as temporary noise. When merchants began offering lower prices for boats like his, he interpreted these offers not as market information, but as personal insults, as attempts to cheat him out of value that he knew with certainty existed. He had paid 100 gold coins. Therefore, the Fortuna was worth 100 gold coins. The logic seemed unassailable to him, a mathematical truth as solid as the planks beneath his feet. In the village lived an old captain named Master Eloy, a man of 70 years with a beard white as sea foam and eyes that had witnessed 60 fishing seasons, each one teaching him something the previous seasons had not. Master Eloy had survived storms that killed younger men, had prospered during booms and survived busts, had owned 7 different boats over his long career, buying and selling with the pragmatic wisdom of someone who understood that boats were tools, not monuments. That value was always present and never passed. He watched Ambrose with the concerned patience of someone seeing a familiar tragedy begin to unfold. He had seen this pattern before in other young fishermen, this dangerous confusion between cost and value, between what was paid and what is. Master Eloy attempted to teach Ambrose what he considered the fundamental wisdom of the sea and of markets: adaptability. The value of a boat, he explained over cups of wine in his weathered cottage, was not determined by what you paid for it, but by what it could earn today and what the next captain would pay tomorrow, These were the only relevant numbers, the only prices that mattered in any practical sense. Historical cost was merely history, a fact about the past with no authority over the present. But Ambrose could not hear this wisdom, or perhaps more accurately, he heard it, but could not accept it, because accepting it would require acknowledging something his mind violently resisted. That he might have made a mistake, that circumstances might have changed, that the 100 gold coins he had paid might have purchased less value than he believed. When Master Eloy spoke about market prices, Ambrose heard only the voice of a defeatist, someone who had grown timid with age, who no longer had the courage to hold firm against market fluctuations. When a merchant approached Ambrose on the dock one afternoon, offering 80 gold coins for the Fortuna, Ambrose laughed with genuine amusement at what seemed to him an absurd proposition. 80 gold coins? He had paid 100. The Fortuna was worth 100. 80 was a price for old boats, damaged boats, boats that had lost their value through neglect or age. His Fortuna was none of these things. It was worth exactly what he had paid, and he would wait, however long necessary, until the market recognized this objective truth and offered him a fair price. The merchant explained patiently that 80 gold coins was the current market price, reflecting the fact that the great fish schools had migrated north, that boats the size of the Fortuna could no longer make the profitable long voyages, that supply and demand had shifted the equilibrium. But these words reached Ambrose's ears without reaching his understanding. The only number that had meaning for him was 100. The anchor was set. This is the mechanism of anchoring bias. This is how an arbitrary initial number becomes a prison. The human mind, when forming judgments about value, does not start from a neutral position and carefully weigh all available evidence. Instead, it grasps onto the first piece of information it encounters, typically the initial price or estimate, and then insufficiently adjusts from that anchor, even when presented with contradictory data. The adjustment, if it happens at all, is inadequate, leaving us tethered to that original number through invisible but incredibly strong psychological chains. Ambrose's anchor was the 100 gold coins he had paid. Every subsequent evaluation of the Fortuna's value was unconsciously referenced against this number, and his mind found countless reasons why the boat should still be worth that amount, while systematically ignoring or minimizing reasons why it might be worth less. When the merchant offered 80, Ambrose's mind did not process this as new information about market conditions. It processed it as a deviation from the true value, an aberration that would surely correct itself if he simply waited with firm conviction. The anchor was not merely influencing his judgment, it had become his judgment, the fixed star by which he navigated all decisions regarding his boat. Months passed, and the conditions that had lowered the Fortuna's market value did not reverse, but intensified. The fish schools established themselves firmly in northern waters, showing no signs of returning south. Fishermen with larger boats adapted, making the longer voyages and returning with holds full of catch. Those with medium boats like the Fortuna faced a choice: sell at the new market price and reinvest in more suitable assets, or hold on to depreciating vessels in hope of a reversal that might never come. Master Eloy, with his characteristic pragmatism, sold his old boat for 70 gold coins, a price that represented a loss from what he had originally paid, but a price that reflected current market reality. He took those 70 coins, added his savings, and purchased a share in a larger vessel designed for northern waters, immediately beginning to generate income again. He tried to explain his reasoning to Ambrose. Accepting market price was not defeat, but adaptation, the fundamental survival strategy of successful fishermen and successful investors. The market did not care about anyone's purchase price. The market cared only about present utility and future potential. But Ambrose, sitting on the deck of his idle Fortuna, reading and rereading his original purchase receipt as if it were a sacred text that could change reality through repeated consultation, could not accept this logic. The market price continued to fall. 70 gold coins became the offer, then 60, then 50. Each decline made Ambrose more determined to hold out, because each decline made the gap between his anchor and reality wider, made the implicit loss larger, made the idea of selling more psychologically painful. This is the vicious cycle that anchoring bias creates. The further reality diverges from the anchor, the more desperately we cling to the anchor, because acknowledging the true distance would require admitting a larger mistake, accepting a greater loss. Ambrose began to spend his days looking for any information that suggested the fish would return south, that medium boats would regain value, that his anchor of 100 gold coins was still valid. He found occasional stories of lucky fishermen who caught good hauls in southern waters, and he seized upon these as proof that the market was wrong, that his valuation was correct. He ignored the systematic data showing declining southern catches, deteriorating market conditions, structural shifts in the fishing economy. He had become, without realizing it, a victim of confirmation bias layered on top of anchoring bias, seeking only information that validated his anchor while filtering out information that challenged it. Master Eloy watched with increasing concern, recognizing the symptoms of a mindset that had destroyed many good fishermen before Ambrose. But the anchoring bias was not merely about the number. It was about something deeper and more painful, the psychology of loss aversion. Selling the Fortuna for 80 gold coins would have required Ambrose to acknowledge a loss of 20 coins. Selling for 60 would mean accepting a loss of 40. These were not merely financial calculations. They were admissions of error, confessions of failed judgment, blows to identity and self-conception. As long as Ambrose held the boat, as long as he refused to sell at market price, he could maintain the comforting fiction that no loss had occurred, that the boat still retained its original value of 100 gold coins, that this value was merely temporarily unrecognized by an irrational market that would eventually correct itself. The unsold boat allowed him to avoid the psychological pain of realized loss, even though the economic reality was that the loss had already occurred the moment market value fell below purchase price. He was choosing psychological comfort over financial rationality, preferring the illusion of preserved value to the reality of diminished value. And this preference was costing him not just opportunity, but actual wealth, as the boat continued to depreciate and demand ongoing maintenance costs. Time is cruel to those who refuse to acknowledge its passage. The Fortuna, sitting idle in the harbor while other boats went to sea, began to deteriorate. Wood exposed to sun and salt without the maintenance that active use justifies began to rot. Sails left folded too long developed mildew. Ropes weakened. But Ambrose, trapped in his anchoring bias, could not see this deterioration clearly. He told himself that the boat was still fundamentally sound, still worth its original purchase price, still valuable once the market corrected its irrational undervaluation. He made minimal repairs using cheap materials, because spending significant money on maintenance would reduce his profit when he eventually sold at his anchor price of 100 gold coins. He had constructed a perfect logical circle that justified inaction. The boat was worth 100 because he paid 100. Therefore, he should not sell for less. Therefore, he should not invest much in maintenance. Therefore, the boat deteriorated. Therefore, offers decreased. Therefore, he became more determined to hold out for 100. The anchor had become not just a weight, holding him in place, but an anchor actively pulling him down, dragging him deeper into financial ruin with each passing month. Master Eloy made one final attempt to break through Ambrose's anchored thinking. He found the young fisherman on the dock, staring at his deteriorating boat, and spoke with the blunt honesty of someone who knows gentle suggestions have failed. The Fortuna, in its current state, was worth perhaps 40 gold coins, maybe less. This was not an insult or a negotiating position. It was market reality based on the boat's condition, capabilities, and the current fishing economy. If Ambrose sold now for 40 coins and used that capital as a down payment to join a consortium operating a northern vessel, he could begin generating income again, could begin rebuilding his wealth from a diminished but real foundation. The alternative was to continue holding, continue hoping, continue anchoring to a number that had no connection to present reality, and watch the boat deteriorate until it was worth nothing at all. The choice was between accepting a significant loss now or accepting total loss later. But Ambrose, with his hands clutching the faded purchase receipt that he still carried, looked at Master Eloy with eyes that mixed desperation with stubborn pride. 40 gold coins was robbery, he said. It was an insult to the Fortuna's true value. He would rather let the boat rot in the harbor than sell it for such a catastrophic loss. He had paid 100. The boat was worth 100. The market would eventually recognize this. He just needed to wait. The Fortuna did not wait. The inevitable arrived on a winter night when storms battered the harbor and old ropes finally gave way. The boat, inadequately maintained, took on water faster than bilge pumps could remove it. By morning, the Fortuna had settled to the harbor bottom, only its mast visible above the surface like a grave marker commemorating the death, not just of a boat, but of an illusion. Ambrose stood on the dock, watching the water lap against that protruding mast, still holding his waterlogged purchase receipt, with its fading ink that once read 100 gold coins. The anchor he had carried in his mind had manifested in physical reality. His boat, literally anchored to the harbor floor, destroyed by his inability to release his mental anchor to a number that existed only in memory. He had lost everything, not gradually, as happens to those who sell at declining prices and preserve some capital, but completely, as happens to those who refuse to sell at any price below their anchor and end up with nothing at all. The total loss he had tried so desperately to avoid by holding out for his purchase price had arrived anyway. But now, with absolute finality, with no possibility of recovery, with no capital remaining to reinvest, Master Eloy found Ambrose sitting on the dock, not with anger or judgment, but with the profound sadness of someone who has watched an entirely preventable tragedy unfold. He sat beside the young man and spoke truths that Ambrose was finally in his ruin ready to hear. The 100 gold coins Ambrose had paid was merely a starting point, a historical fact about a past transaction. It was not the boat's value, not its destiny, not a number that reality was obligated to honor. The value of any investment, Master Eloy explained, is always and only its current market value, the price at which willing buyers and willing sellers agree to transact today. Purchase price, the anchor that had destroyed Ambrose, is economically irrelevant to decisions about what to do with an asset now. The only question that matters is forward-looking. Given current market price and future prospects, should I hold or sell? What I paid in the past has no bearing on this decision except as an emotional barrier that clouds judgment. Ambrose had been defeated not by the sea, not by changing fish migrations, not by market forces, but by a number in his head, an anchor he could not release until it dragged him completely underwater. Master Eloy unrolled a map showing fishing routes and boat prices, but this map was different from typical charts. The prices written beside each boat type were constantly crossed out and rewritten, reflecting daily market changes. This, Eloy explained, was how the wise investor must think, constantly reevaluating, perpetually updating assessments based on current information, never allowing any historical price to anchor future judgment. The price you paid is the least important price, because it exists in the past, and the past cannot be changed. The price the asset is worth today, and might be worth tomorrow, are the only prices that matter for decisions you must make now. Ambrose, now without a boat, without capital, facing the necessity of working for other fishermen to earn back what he had lost, could finally understand what he had been unable to hear during the long months of his decline. The heaviest anchor is the one you cannot see, the one forged not in iron, but in memory, the one that chains you not to the harbor floor, but to numbers that no longer exist, except in the prison of your mind. This is the universal tragedy of anchoring bias in financial markets. This is the story repeated 10,000 times every day in every market across the world. How many times have you refused to sell a falling stock because it's worth more, I paid more? How many times have you held a losing position, not because future prospects justified holding, but because selling would require admitting the loss, making it real, acknowledging the distance between your anchor and reality? Anchoring bias commits two fatal errors in investors. First, we sell winning positions too early, as soon as they reach some arbitrary price target we established, based on our purchase price or initial analysis, leaving profits on the table because we anchor to our original expectations, rather than reassessing based on current conditions. Second, and more destructively, we hold losing positions too long, hoping and praying they will return to our purchase price, transforming small losses into catastrophic ones, watching capital erode while we wait for markets to validate anchors that markets do not know exist and would not honor if they did. The psychological mechanism is consistent. We anchor to the first number we encounter, typically our purchase price, and we resist adjusting our valuation adequately even when overwhelming evidence indicates we should. Consider the investor who purchases a stock at $50 per share. This $50 immediately becomes her anchor, the reference point against which all future prices are evaluated. When the stock falls to $40, she does not ask, "Is this stock worth owning at $40 given current fundamentals and future prospects?" Instead, she asks, "When will it get back to my $50 purchase price?" These are completely different questions, leading to completely different decisions. The first question is rational, forward-looking, based on value. The second question is irrational, backward-looking, based on an irrelevant historical fact. If she honestly evaluated the stock at $40, as if she did not already own it, she might conclude it is overvalued even at $40 and should be sold immediately. But the anchor at $50 prevents this clear analysis. The stock falls to $30, then $20, then $10, and at each stage the anchor makes selling psychologically harder because the implicit loss grows larger. Because admitting a $30 per share loss is more painful than admitting a $10 loss was earlier. She holds until the company goes bankrupt, losing everything, because she could never release her anchor to that initial $50 price. If she had sold at $40, she would have preserved 80% of her capital. But the anchor prevented this, and the prevented small loss became an actual total loss. The solution to anchoring bias is conceptually simple, but psychologically difficult. Forget your purchase price. Train yourself to evaluate every holding as if you did not own it, as if you were deciding today whether to buy it at current market price. This mental exercise, often called the fresh eyes approach, strips away the anchor's power by forcing forward-looking analysis. Ask yourself, if I had cash instead of this stock, would I buy this stock at today's price? If the answer is no, then you should not hold the stock either, because holding and buying are economically equivalent decisions. The sunk cost, the money already paid, is gone forever regardless of what you do next. And decisions should be based only on current conditions and future prospects, never on past costs. Implement systematic rules for position management that do not reference your purchase price. Use stop-loss orders based on technical analysis or fundamental deterioration, not based on, "I'll sell when I get back to even." Use take-profit targets based on valuation models, not based on arbitrary multiples of your entry price. Reevaluate constantly, updating your analysis as new information arrives, never letting any historical number anchor your current judgment. The market is an ocean, vast and indifferent, following laws of supply and demand, moving with currents of fear and greed, responsive to fundamentals and psychology, but never, ever remembering what you paid. The market does not know your purchase price, does not care about your anchor, will not adjust its valuation to accommodate your need to avoid realizing losses. You are not competing against the market. You are competing against yourself, against the psychological biases that evolution embedded in your cognitive architecture, against the anchoring bias that makes the first number you hear disproportionately influential on every subsequent judgment. Ambrose's tragedy was not that he bought a boat that declined in value. That happens to every investor sometimes, unavoidably, as a natural consequence of operating in uncertain environments. His tragedy was that he could not release his mental anchor to his purchase price, could not adapt to new information, could not accept present reality because he remained chained to past transactions. And this same tragedy plays out in millions of portfolios, where investors hold losing positions year after year, hoping for recovery to entry prices, watching opportunities pass while anchored to numbers that should have been forgotten the moment circumstances changed. Do not let the memory of a past price sink your future. The only prices that matter are today's price and tomorrow's potential price. Yesterday's price is history, informative perhaps for analysis, but utterly irrelevant for decision-making. Release your anchors, all of them, especially those invisible ones embedded so deeply in your thinking that you no longer recognize them as anchors rather than truth. Value is always present tense, never past tense. Learn from Ambrose, who lost everything because he could not forget 100 gold coins, because he could not see that the boat's worth had nothing to do with what he paid and everything to do with what it could earn and what others would pay today. Learn to sail free, unchained by historical numbers, responsive to present conditions, adaptable to changing markets, willing always to reevaluate, courageous enough to accept losses before they become catastrophic. This is the wisdom that separates those who survive long-term from those who, like Ambrose, watch their capital sink beneath waves while clutching worthless receipts of what they once paid. The heaviest anchor is the one you carry in your mind. Release it, and finally be free to navigate toward value wherever it actually exists, not wherever you once hoped it would be. Subscribe to discover how to break free from the invisible anchors holding your portfolio hostage, to learn the fables that illuminate not the prices we remember, but the values we must see.